I never thought visiting my best friend's house would change the way I saw his mom forever, but the night she whispered, "You're hard to resist," I realized some truths can't be unspoken. I've been walking through that front door for years. My best friend's house has always felt like a second home, the kind of place where the furniture never moves, where the same family photos line the hallway, and where the smell of fresh coffee always seems to hang in the air. Normally, stepping inside brings me comfort. But this time, it felt different. She was standing there in the kitchen when I arrived, my friend's mom. She turned as I came in, her face lighting up with a smile that had always been warm, always welcoming. But today, I noticed something in that smile I hadn't seen before. Maybe it was in her eyes, the way they held mine for a second too long. Or maybe it was me who was suddenly seeing her differently. She's always been graceful, in that quiet, effortless way. Not the kind of beauty that asks for attention, but the kind that makes a room feel calmer just because she's in it. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling near her cheek as she reached for a mug. And for some reason, I couldn't look away. "Coffee?" she asked, like she always does. Simple routine. But even the ordinary felt sharpened somehow, as though every little detail carried more weight. The sound of her voice, the curve of her smile, the way she pushed the mug toward me, all of it lingered. I sat at the table, watching her move around the kitchen, and I caught myself noticing things I never had before. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear while laughing softly at something I said. The way the light from the window brushed against her face, highlighting the fine lines near her eyes, marks of a life lived, experiences I couldn't even imagine yet. Instead of making her seem older, they made her presence feel steady. Real. And then it hit me. I wasn't just looking at her as my friend's mom anymore. I was looking at her as a woman. It unsettled me, that shift. My chest tightened with a mix of guilt and curiosity. I shouldn't be thinking this way, right? I told myself it was nothing. Just a passing thought. But the truth is, once you see someone in a new light, it's impossible to unsee them. She sat across from me, sliding the mug between her hands as though warming them. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and in that pause, the world seemed to quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, everything faded except that look. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't forced. But something about it carried a weight, like a silence filled with questions neither of us wanted to ask out loud. I shifted in my chair, trying to focus on the conversation, about work, about how quickly the year had gone by, about small things that should have been easy to keep light. But under every word was that new awareness, unspoken but undeniable. By the time my friend finally walked into the room, the spell broke. She turned toward him quickly, her expression slipping back into the familiar warmth of a mother greeting her son. And me? I forced myself to laugh, to play along, to act as though nothing had changed. But I knew better. Something had shifted in me, in us, maybe. Something quiet, subtle, and impossible to ignore. And even though I tried to bury it, to tell myself it was nothing, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a story I hadn't meant to start. The next afternoon, I found myself back at their house again. My friend had stepped out for a bit, leaving me in the kitchen with her. Normally, that wouldn't have meant anything. We'd shared this space countless times, her moving about with casual ease, me sitting at the table, waiting for my friend. But now, every little thing seemed to carry weight. She poured coffee into 2 mugs, and when she set mine down in front of me, her fingers brushed against the back of my hand. It was the lightest touch, nothing intentional, maybe nothing at all. But it lingered in my skin, the way warmth lingers after sunlight. I told myself not to overthink it, not to read into what might have been nothing more than chance. And yet my chest tightened anyway. I watched her as she sat across from me. The chair creaked softly under her, and for a moment we were just 2 people at a table, drinking coffee. But there was something in the air, not loud, not obvious, but steady. Like a current running beneath calm water. She asked me about school, about work. The kind of question she's asked before, but this time her eyes didn't drift as she listened. They held mine, steady, curious, present. I answered, trying to keep my voice even, but the longer she looked at me, the more I felt that awareness growing between us. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the details around me, the faint clink of her spoon against the mug, the soft sound of a clock ticking in the hallway, the sunlight cutting across the kitchen table. But even those details seemed to highlight her presence. Every sound, every shadow, seemed to circle back to her. When she leaned forward slightly, resting her chin against her hand, I caught the faintest smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't even directed fully at me. But something about the softness of it, paired with the warmth in her eyes, made the air feel closer. I shifted, clearing my throat, but then she reached across the table for the sugar bowl. Her hand brushed against mine again. This time, there was no mistaking it. I froze, caught between the instinct to pull back and the desire to stay right where I was. She didn't pull away there. Not immediately. Her fingers lingered, light, tentative, almost questioning, before retreating. And when she did, I saw it. The tiniest flicker of something in her eyes. Not regret. Not guilt. Just recognition. We didn't say anything about it. Instead, we kept talking, about small things, about nothing at all. But every word was wrapped in a quiet intensity neither of us dared to name. At one point, she laughed softly at something I said, and when she did, her eyes crinkled in the corners. That laugh has always been familiar to me, part of the background noise of my life. But hearing it then, just for me, felt different. Intimate. It was in those small, ordinary moments that I realized something extraordinary was happening. The closeness wasn't loud or rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was in the subtle touches, the way her gaze lingered, the unspoken silence between words. And I knew, even if we never said it out loud, even if nothing more ever happened, we had crossed into something new. A quiet understanding that neither of us could take back. Later that evening, after my friend had left the house to run an errand, I stayed behind. I told myself it was no big deal, that I was just waiting, just passing the time. But the truth is, a part of me wanted to stay. A part of me wanted to be near her. The living room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. She was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped lightly over her lap, scrolling through a book she had been meaning to finish. I sat down in the chair across from her, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I couldn't help but glance up at her every so often. After a few minutes of silence, she closed the book and set it aside. She looked at me, her expression thoughtful, almost as though she was weighing whether to speak at all. And then, in a voice softer than I'd ever heard from her, she said, "You know, sometimes it feels like life moves faster than I can keep up." I didn't know what to say at first. The words carried weight, a kind of quiet honesty that didn't ask for an answer but deserved one anyway. So I set my phone down and leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "I mean, you wake up one day and realize so much of your life has already happened. You've raised kids, worked through years of routine, done all the things you're supposed to do, and still, somehow, you feel unseen." Her voice didn't break, but I could feel the fragility in it, like a window just thin enough to reveal the truth behind it. I nodded slowly, not out of pity, but understanding. "I don't think you're unseen," I said carefully. "I think maybe the people around you have just gotten so used to how steady you are, they forget to say it out loud." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes softening, her shoulders easing as though those words had lifted some invisible weight. And then, almost without thinking, she reached out and touched my arm. Just a light brush of her fingers, but it was deliberate this time. It lingered. That touch said more than her words had. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just a thank you for listening. It was a connection, one I felt travel through me like warmth spreading from the inside out. I didn't move away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, let her hand rest there as long as she wanted. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady when I finally said, "You deserve to be seen." Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to respond, but no words came. Instead, she let her hand slip back to her lap, though the trace of her touch lingered on my skin. The moment hung between us, fragile, dangerous, and yet impossibly comforting. Neither of us crossed the line, but we both knew the line was there now, and that we had brushed dangerously close to it. When my friend returned home a short while later, the air shifted back into normalcy. She stood, greeting him with the same easy smile she'd always had, and I did my best to act like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because once someone shows you their unguarded self, once you see their vulnerability up close, you can never look at them the same way again. And I knew, in the quiet of that living room, in the softness of her hand against mine, that we had crossed into something deeper. Something that wasn't going away. The night stretched longer than I expected. My friend had gone upstairs, leaving me once again alone with her in the quiet of the house. The television hummed faintly in the background, though neither of us was really watching it. I sat at the edge of the couch, one leg resting on the floor, the other bent slightly. She was beside me, not too close, but not far either. Close enough that I could sense her presence, the faint warmth of her shoulder, the soft scent of her perfume that clung to the air between us. For a long time, we didn't speak. And yet, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying, everything we were trying so carefully to hide. When she leaned forward to reach for the remote, her arm brushed against mine. It was innocent, almost accidental, but I froze. I felt every nerve in my body come alive in that single moment of contact. And when she didn't immediately move away, when she allowed that closeness to linger just a heartbeat longer, I knew she felt it too. I turned my head slightly, and suddenly her face was just inches from mine. The glow of the lamp softened her features, tracing the curve of her cheek, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. She looked at me then, not as her son's friend, not as someone younger. Just me? My breath caught in my chest. The air between us felt impossibly thin, as though one wrong move might shatter everything. And then she whispered it. Barely audible, like a confession she hadn't meant to let slip. You're hard to resist. The words hung there, suspended, filling the room with an electricity I could almost feel on my skin. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. My mind raced, searching for a response, searching for something that wouldn't break this fragile, trembling moment. I could see the regret flicker in her eyes almost instantly, as though she wanted to pull the words back, tuck them away where they belong. But I didn't let her. I steadied my voice, soft but certain, and said the only thing I could. Then don't. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Her eyes widened slightly, caught between shock and something else, something raw, unguarded. Her hand shifted, just barely brushing against mine on the cushion between us. It wasn't deliberate at first. It was hesitant, testing. And when I didn't move away, when I let my hand stay there, her fingers curled lightly, almost imperceptibly, toward mine. We didn't kiss. We didn't move closer than that. But in that moment, it felt like the air itself closed the distance. Her breathing changed, a little slower, a little deeper. Mine followed. It wasn't about what happened. It was about what didn't. We sat there, side by side, hands almost touching, both of us aware that something had shifted forever. That a boundary had been named out loud, and that neither of us wanted to step back from it. Eventually, she leaned away, her composure returning, her smile soft but guarded. She murmured something about the time, about needing to get some sleep. But when she stood, her eyes lingered on me for just a second too long. I stayed seated, heart pounding, replaying her words in my head. You're hard to resist. And my reply, echoing in the silence she'd left behind. Then don't. That night, I realized we'd crossed into dangerous territory, not through a kiss, not through touch, but through honesty. And somehow, that was even more powerful. That night I couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in my mind over and over. You're hard to resist. And my reply, reckless but honest. Then don't. By morning, I convinced myself maybe she regretted it, maybe it was nothing. Maybe the moment had already slipped into the silence of unspoken things. But when I walked into the kitchen, the sunlight spilling through the window, she was there, standing by the counter, cradling a cup of coffee like she always did. She looked up at me, and for a second, everything froze. Her eyes searched mine, careful, uncertain, but not dismissing what had passed between us. "Morning," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that settled somewhere deep inside me. "Morning," I echoed, my throat suddenly dry. I joined her by the counter, closer than I normally would. Close enough that I could feel the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm. It wasn't deliberate, but I didn't step away. Neither did she. For a while, we stood there in silence, sipping coffee, pretending it was just another day. But the quiet stretched, and in that space, every movement felt louder. The soft clink of her spoon, the way her fingers wrapped around the mug, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Finally, she set her cup down and leaned back against the counter, her hands gripping the edge. Her expression was calm, but her body spoke a different language, shoulders slightly tense, chest rising a little faster, like she was holding back words she didn't know how to release. I turned toward her, my hand brushing against hers on the counter. This time, it wasn't accidental. My fingers grazed hers slowly, deliberately. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, almost shyly, she let her hand rest against mine. It was such a simple thing, skin against skin, still and quiet, but it felt like everything. I glanced at her, and her eyes met mine. There was no laughter, no casual tone. Just a depth I hadn't seen before, a vulnerability she rarely showed. She whispered, almost like she was reminding herself, "This isn't supposed to happen." I swallowed, my thumb brushing lightly over her hand. "Maybe not," I said, voice low. "But it is." Her lips parted, and I thought for a moment she might step away. But instead, she let out a breath, slow, steady, and leaned in just slightly. Not enough to close the distance, but enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from her, the gravity pulling us closer. I lifted my arm carefully, almost hesitantly, and rested it around her shoulders. She stilled for a second, then relaxed into me, her head finding its place against my chest. It was the gentlest embrace, nothing rushed, nothing daring. Just the two of us standing there, holding on to something neither of us wanted to name yet. I could feel her heartbeat, quick but steady, syncing with mine. My hand brushed softly along her arm, a silent reassurance that I wasn't letting go. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, no words, no explanations. Just quiet closeness, fragile and real. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at me with a small smile, one that carried both hesitation and hope. And in that moment I knew this wasn't just temptation. It was something deeper. Something neither of us had planned for, but both of us were already choosing, little by little. That embrace should have been enough. A quiet moment, one we could tuck away, pretend it never happened. But the truth is, it stayed with me. Every detail, every breath. And I could see it stayed with her too. Later that night, after the house had quieted down, we found ourselves in the living room again. The television flickered in the background, but neither of us paid attention to it. She was sitting on the couch, her arms folded loosely in front of her, and I could tell by the way her eyes avoided mine that something heavy was pressing against her thoughts. When I finally sat down beside her, the silence between us wasn't comfortable the way it had been before. It was heavier. Tense. She exhaled slowly, her voice low when she finally spoke. "We can't do this." Her words cut through me, though I knew they were coming. I stayed quiet, waiting. She turned her head, her eyes meeting mine, and for the first time since this began, I saw fear there. Not of me, but of what this meant. "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. And me," she trailed off, shaking her head softly. "I'm supposed to be someone you respect, not someone you cross boundaries with." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening at the conflict in her voice. She wasn't pushing me away because she didn't feel something. She was pushing me away because she did. "I do respect you," I said carefully. That's why this matters. I'm not playing games with you. Her lips trembled into the faintest smile, sad, almost apologetic. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. If anyone found out, her voice faltered. My son. The neighbors. People wouldn't understand. They'd say things. They'd tear us apart before this even had a chance to be anything. I felt the weight of her words because they were true. The world wouldn't see what I saw, the quiet strength she carried, the way she made me feel seen in ways no one else had. To them, it would just be scandal. To me, it was connection. I leaned closer, my voice steady. I don't care what they think. She looked at me sharply, her eyes wet with something she was fighting to keep inside. But I do. Her honesty hit me harder than if she rejected me outright. She wasn't shutting me out, she was torn between her heart and her reality. Between wanting something deeply and fearing what it might cost. The silence that followed was thick. My hand itched to reach for hers, but I held back. This wasn't the time to push. Instead, I let her speak. I can't deny what's happening between us, she whispered. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to face what it could mean. I nodded slowly, my voice softer now. Then let me be strong enough for both of us. I'm not asking you to have it all figured out. I don't want to pretend this isn't real. Her eyes searched mine, torn, vulnerable. And for a moment, it felt like we were standing at the edge of something vast, the choice to step forward, or to turn back and never know what might have been. She didn't answer. Not in words. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand lightly over mine. It wasn't permission. It wasn't surrender. It was something in between, a fragile acknowledgement that she felt it too. That night, nothing more happened. No kiss, no embrace. Just two people caught between desire and fear, holding onto each other's hand like it was the only thing keeping them from drifting apart. And as much as it hurt, I knew it mattered. Because hesitation doesn't mean the feeling isn't real. Sometimes, it means it's too real to face all at once. The next morning came softly, as though the house itself was trying to be gentle with us. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, warm and golden, painting long streaks across the wooden table. I was already there, sitting with a mug of coffee, when she walked in. She moved quietly, her steps unhurried, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like herself, and yet different somehow, as though the night before had left her just as restless as it had left me. For a moment, she simply stood there, watching me. Her expression wasn't guarded, not quite. It was thoughtful. Careful. Like she was choosing what this day was going to mean. Did you sleep? I asked gently, breaking the silence. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. Not much. Neither did I. She joined me at the table, sliding into the chair across from mine. The sunlight caught her face, softening every detail, making her look both strong and vulnerable at once. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, but she wasn't really drinking. She was stalling. I waited. I wanted her to speak first, to give me some sign of where we stood after everything that had been said, and left unsaid. Finally, she let out a breath, her eyes lifting to meet mine. I keep thinking about last night, she admitted softly. So do I said, my voice steady even though my heart raced. Her fingers tapped lightly against the mug. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know how complicated this might get, or how people will react if they ever knew. But, she paused, her throat tightening just slightly. I do know how I feel when I'm with you. Her words hung in the air, fragile and brave. I leaned forward, my hand sliding across the table until it found hers. She hesitated for only a second before letting her fingers curl into mine. And how do you feel? I asked, almost afraid of the answer, even though I already knew. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. Seen. Wanted. Alive in a way I haven't felt in years. My chest tightened at her honesty. There it was, not a grand declaration, not a reckless promise. Just truth. I squeezed her hand gently, grounding the moment. Then that's enough for me. We don't have to figure out tomorrow right now. Let's just not ignore this today. Her eyes softened, and I could see the weight she'd been carrying slowly begin to lift. Not gone entirely, it never would be, not yet, but lighter. Manageable. She leaned across the table then, just slightly, and I met her halfway. Not with a kiss, not yet. But with the closeness of two people no longer pretending. Her forehead rested gently against mine, and for a few seconds that was all there was, the quiet rhythm of our breathing, the warmth of her hand in mine, the sunlight wrapping around us like a secret we were choosing to keep. When she finally pulled back, her smile lingered. I don't know where this is going, she said softly, but I don't want to run from it anymore. I nodded, my voice calm but certain. Neither do I. The world outside that kitchen still waited, with all its judgments and complications. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the honesty between us, the choice we made not to bury it, not to pretend it was something less than what it was. And as the morning light grew brighter, I realized something. Love doesn't always come the way you expect it. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it asks for patience. And sometimes it's enough just to sit at a kitchen table, hand in hand, knowing you've chosen each other, even if it's only for today. And for me, for her, for us, that was more than enough. 24L